If you have a bull who can't be controlled, what do? You take away his source of aggression and will. You castrate him. Religion learned this trick long ago, but they couldn't have people do that all the time, or they wouldn't be able to reproduce to raise armies and be able to influence people anymore. So instead, they picked the next best thing. They made people feel guilty about having sex. A common cult tactic is to marry the children off as young as possible. This is because when the leader created the cult, most of the people were single and gave him all sorts of attention. Then kids came along, and they take away the attention from him. So the leader tries to make the kids grow up as fast as possible so that his adoring public will continue to love him. Not only that, but marrying young has a major advantage. It increases the bonds and gives them a lot more to lose if they were to leave, and it gives them less time to question what they believe. The majority of Christians I know are married and have kids, and even if you try and have a good debate with them, as intelligent as they might be, they really can't, as they don't have the mental energy to do so. By the time their kids leave, they are set in their ways, comfortable in their community, so why would they want to upset it by thinking different thoughts outside of their religion? I have a feeling that mainstream religion would marry their children off at the age of puberty if the concept of high school education hadn't been so reinforced, and pedophilia as well. I grew up with the abstinence-only belief. However, every peer I knew either lied about abstinence to look good, or they would rush to get married so they could have sex. Marriage is a lifelong commitment with someone you plan to spend the rest of your life with. The drive to have sex is one of our most ingrained drives, especially in teens. Making a decision based on being horny is like deciding one meal you're going to have for the rest of your life when you're starving. Instead of taking the time to learn your own tastes, what kind of personality suits you, and what kind of ethical and philosophical beliefs and variety of intellect that person has, you instead just jump at the first thing that looks good, and when you're now full, you realize, oh God, I'm stuck with this for the rest of my life? The church also stresses that their God defined marriage, which is funny because if you read anywhere in the Bible, a marriage is a contract between a man and her father, assuming the man didn't acquire her in a war, and then he was required to give her a 30-day mourning period for the family that he killed before raping her as his wife. In Leviticus, one form of marriage is defined as a woman and her rapist if he pays her dad a certain sum. Religious folks can come up with some seriously crazy rationalization to attempt to cover this one. Marriage has always been a secular thing, based on societal advantages, and marriage has evolved and progressed based on that society. The current version of marriage is nothing like what it looked like 100 years ago or earlier, and it will continue to evolve as we better understand the human mind. The church has self-propagated by monopolizing marriage. Young dumb teens are forced to decide something at a young age that they are going to be stuck with for the rest of their life, and they're pushed to have kids young, which prevents them from understanding themselves and each other, as "be fruitful and multiply" is a command of great importance. Actually, that command, and the concept of having a quiver full of children, was something idealized back in the day because 2/5 of them were lost to disease, and they needed to make a lot more soldiers to die for their god. You know, sometimes some of the arrows in your quiver miss, so, you've got to have enough for backup. Survival by probability statistics. Nature uses this tactic all the time, and it works. However, as death becomes less and less prevalent, and technology over numbers is a more important factor in terms of self-defense, prosperity, and survival, reproduction is not that important, especially on a planet of 6.5 billion people and rising. It was told to me over and over again growing up that the concept of overpopulation is a myth. I was told, and quite correctly so, that everyone in the world could live on a 1,089 square foot of land in an area the size of Texas. What they failed to take into account is how much more acreage we actually use versus how much we live on. An estimate showed that the average American used about 12 acres of land. I, taking the test, scored about 8 acres. What these religious folks failed to take into account is just how much of the planet is unlivable, how limited the water is on most of the planet, and how scattered and sparse the resources like rare metals and oil are. We Americans are only 5% of the population, but we use around 75% of the world's resources, and we are perfectly happy to do so, while developing nations have people starving to death daily. We would need at least 6 whole Earths to allow everyone to live as well as we do in this country, or some major advances in resource management, but that would involve giving more power to science and social spending, which fundies tend to be so against. Of course, the people who need this technology most can't afford it, so the hand of the market ignores them. All studies show that the lower number of kids a family has, the more likely these kids are to succeed in life, as their parents can use more resources and finances on the child, as well as spend more time and attention on them in terms of education, emotion, and other forms of bonding. Studies show that an increased number and variety of words used when talking to a child increases that child's IQ. These have to be interactive words, where the parent is directly talking to the child and playing with that child, which allows all the child's emotions and senses to be stimulated, something the TV cannot do. The IQ of the younger siblings tend to drop slightly according to statistics unless there is a significant difference in ages, because a parent doesn't have the time or energy to spend that much time and attention on a lot of children. And children like the Duggars end up being raised by their siblings, being almost forgotten in practical terms, even though they may be emotionally all remembered. Knowing these statistics, having that many children should almost be considered child abuse, especially to have that many children in that short of a period of time is dangerous and draining on the mother's body, and a woman needs at least 2 years to recuperate from a pregnancy to ensure that her and her next baby are healthy. I would go further with banning so many children, but it jumps into not allowing women the right to their own body. The church in Europe has fallen out of favor, and because a lot of Europeans realize that less people is better for the planet as well as the children, they have been having less children. However, because our technologies are not sufficient in such areas as robotics, an influx of immigrants from less educated and more religious nations are moving to Europe and raising their fundamentalism. The European churches claim that Europe is losing to the Muslims because they turned away from God and stopped popping out kids. It's a war of the wombs, one being fought by many Christians in the U.S. Atheists and non-believers that education is the only real way to propagate their kind, because logic and the facts end up leading someone with good critical thinking skills to reject God, which is why churches accuse schools and colleges of brainwashing children into atheism. Sadly, the U.S. has a crappy education system comparatively with Europe, so early marriage and lots of kids from its natives will help ensure that Christianity stays the majority until at least 2050, when Islam takes over, which will hopefully still be a minority when compared to us heathens.